The mailbag is open, and Pat and I will be answering your questions about anything relating to the Pittsburgh Penguins.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes. You can follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Damp. You can follow him on Twitter at Synonym for Wet, and you can follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. Of course, thank you all so much for making this your first listen/watch of the day. We are free and available on all platforms. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. Yes, I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it is a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go right now, free on the App Store or Google Play. So Pat, we finally opened up the mailbag for the first time in about 8 months today, and we got some pretty good questions for this episode of the show, starting with a bunch about, guess it, Tristan Jarry and the Penguins goaltending situation. Whether you are, for example, Gaming.ed679 on YouTube or Scott PY on YouTube, whether it's about keep Jarry, re-sign Ned, or try to flip Jarry with some salary retention. Those are just two questions that we got relating to Jarry. So we're just going to combine them and a couple others that we got to answer this question about what to do with Jarry and the goaltending this offseason. If you're asking me, I think I would probably move on from Alex Nedeljkovic. I think he's going to get a cap hit that might be too far out of the Penguins' range. I know I've had some people tell me, not insiders or anything, or not people relating to the team, that, I can only see him getting $2 to $2.5 million. And to a degree, yeah, I can see that, but I still think a team out there is maybe going to give him $3 to $3.5 million per season. I mean, Jonas Korpisalo just got a massive contract with the Ottawa Senators, and he was not really that good once he got there. Teams that are desperate for goaltending will overpay in free agency, and I'm just not really interested in having him and Jarry back at about $8.59 million for a season. I think that's too much money. Blomqvist, I do think he is in their plans for next season, but when it comes to Jarry, it's tough because there's a different thing between what I think they should do and what they're actually going to do with him. What I think they're going to do with him is keep him just because of the contract and how hard it'll be to move from that contract. What I would do, I would try to get out of that contract and get a different starting netminder in here to pair with Blomqvist, who I do think is potentially going to be NHL ready. I'll circle back to an idea that I had last offseason. I'll throw it out here again. If you can somehow go after one of the two netminders in Boston, that would be my top target, Pat. One of Ullmark or Swayman. Ullmark was kind of in trade talks around the trade deadline. The Bruins decided to keep him, which of course was a great move just because they have, I think, the best tandem in the league right now. If you can somehow go after one of those two, maybe pair that goalie with someone like Blomqvist, or maybe if you don't think he's ready, you get a different 1B in there. I think that works. So again, if you're asking me, I would look to move on just because I think we've seen what we've needed to see from Jarry. I do think deep down there is a good goaltender there. He has shown it, but it just hasn't been on a consistent basis. I don't want to see the same thing happen next season where, okay, he has a really good start through 41 games, but then crashes and burns once it turns to February or March just because of what happened this year. So that's what I would do, but I also do think the team will probably keep him for next season. I know there's a little bit of a difference there.
This is a really tough one to answer right now. Like, in my heart, I would like to see them try to move on from Tristan Jarry, get him somewhere else. I think for both parties involved, a change of scenery would do wonders. I also think it's incomplete right now just because we're still in the first round of the playoffs. Nobody has clinched a series yet, despite Carolina and Florida both being up 3-0 in their series. And I'd be willing to bet that the Rangers will be up 3-0 after tonight as well. But at the same time, one thing I always caution people from doing is doing their off-season roster game theory before the playoffs end. Because there's always going to be a team that overreacts to a loss. And I do think there's a handful of teams in this first round that are going to get bounced and they're going to think they should have gone a lot further, and they're going to make completely irrational moves. And when you have a goalie like Jarry, who has a track record of being fairly good, yes, I know the last 2 seasons he has melted down, or at the very least fallen off once we've gotten to March. There's probably a team that looks at him and says, we can fix that. We can make it work here. And if they're a team that's bounced in the first round or even swept in the second, something like that, maybe that's a team you target to see if they'll take him on, because we know the cap's going up next year. And we know a lot of teams are going to have a lot of space. And there's a handful of teams that have openings at goaltender next year. I think of the LA Kings. I'm pretty sure they don't have a goaltender going into next year. Like right now, I don't think they have one signed, if my memory serves. So maybe that's a team that you can get in some trade talks with about maybe they want to get rid of a couple pieces. Maybe they need a goalie. So I don't know. But I think at the end of the day, the chances are more likely than not that he is going to be the goalie here next year. Blomqvist is going to be behind him, and they're going to go get a journeyman that can go up and down from Wilkes-Barre to Pittsburgh in case of injury or Jarry melting down again.
Agree, kind of like a Magnus Hellberg, if you will. Now, if they do decide to move on from Jarry again, there's going to be a lot of rumors surrounding that no matter what. I do think a goalie that will come up from fans, once again, we didn't get a question about it, but I do think one goalie that could also come up from fans is hometown kid John Gibson. I've made my thoughts about Gibson pretty clear on this podcast. I think he's not nearly as good as he used to be. He was once one of the 5 to 10 best goaltenders in the league, but he's been on a downward trend these last few years. And yes, I understand people playing in front of that Ducks team is not easy. They have not been a good defensive team. This year they weren't good either, but I just don't know how much better he's going to be, even behind a Penguins defensive group where, let's face it, the Penguins really weren't that good of a defensive team either. And then when you look at his contract, Pat, for after the season, 3 more years, $6.4 million per year, you would have to get the Ducks to retain at least a bit on that, but I just wouldn't really be interested in acquiring him, even though, again, that's a name that I know would come up.
And there's we have a lot of questions today about roster moves, trades, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And one of the questions that keeps coming up is, and you brought it up too about John Gibson, is salary retention. And yeah, I honestly don't think that's a route the Penguins are going to take, just because you look at their cap friendly right now. They have just under $2.5 million in dead cap going into next year, because you still have 1 year left of retention on Jeff Petrie, and you still have 2 years left of the Jack Johnson buyout. So do you really want to have $3 million or more in dead cap space? I don't. And right now you still at this moment only have a shade under 13 million, even with that current dead cap. So at that point, you're hamstringing yourself more than you already are, to the point where you might only end up with $10 or so million in cap space if you retain on, say, a Tristan Jarry or a Riley Smith or Ryan Graves. And I understand that's kind of the cost of doing business, but it's not like they're sitting there with a blank ledger. You're going to have yourself with a dead cap hit of what could be a good bottom 6 forward or bottom pairing defenseman. And that's just not the dice I want to roll going into next season.
Yeah, the goal for me would be, if you do trade one of Smith or Jarry, or potentially both, you get out of their entire contracts. You don't want to be retaining on any of those, just because right now, again, give or take, you have about a little over 12 million in cap space heading into July 1. You want that number to grow, not decrease, especially after what you said with Petrie. And then, yeah, I almost forgot they still have a couple of years left of that Jack Johnson buyout. Man, that contract just screwed them quite a bit in numerous ways.
But I mean, paying only $916,667 on that contract for the next 2 years is better than what they were paying him. So I'll take that. But when you still have 1.5 million of a contract left in the retention for Jeff Petrie, if you add 1 or 2 more to that and you have over $3 million in buried in dead cap, that's just, it's not good business.
It's not the end of the world for Johnson and Petrie's cap hits, but it still matters when the Penguins are a cap team, just because they spend up to the cap every single year. So every dollar amount counts. But one more question before we head to break and look at a couple other questions for this episode. This is from G Tots on YouTube. What is a bigger need this offseason, goaltender or a middle six forward? So I've kind of been going back and forth on this a little bit. They obviously do need more consistency in net, but I'm still going to go with a middle six forward, preferably someone that can play on the third line that can give you 18 to 20 to 22 goals a season. The Penguins were really missing that for a lot of this season. Yeah, O'Connor was great. He had a big breakout year. Lars Eller was better than I expected, but they still need more production from their bottom six. I will actually die on the hill that the bottom six is their biggest area where they need to address this offseason. I think they really need to address it. You can't just have both those players coming back and really not much else scoring wise from that unit, because there's a chance potentially that O'Connor is up with Crosby and Rust to start next season. If that's the case, he's not in the bottom six. Eller is the only one that had really double-digit goals down there. Man, I know Jeff Carter had a okay season, but he's retiring now. You got to replace that production. Matt Nieto didn't really play. Noel Acciari was banged up through the end of the season. Jansen Harkins was not an answer. Neither was Emil Benstrom. You need to get adequate middle six forwards, and I still think that is their biggest issue heading into this offseason. That's an area where I would address not once, but twice.
I'm right there with you. It's way more of a need than goaltender. I do think that between Tristan Jarry hopefully bouncing back, which I do think is a possibility. I know a lot of people aren't going to like that answer, but like you said about him, there is a good goalie in there. And you still have Blomqvist. There's going to be a handful of guys on the market this year that can play the Alex Nedeljkovic role again next year if they need it, including himself, depending on what he gets offered. So you look at that and you think, okay, they may not be set in goal. It might not be rock solid, but there's a lot more there than there is at the bottom of the roster at forward. Because like you said, if Drew O'Connor ends up in the top six, you take away your best bottom six scoring threat. And we've seen it in these playoffs so far. It's the role players getting it done. Yeah, the stars are doing their job. You look at the statistics page, there's a lot of big names up there, but there's also a handful of names of guys who fill out bottom six or third pairings, getting production in these opening round series. And that is how you build a winner in the modern era of the NHL. You have to be able to score, or at the very least produce from all four lines. And right now, we cannot say that for the Penguins.
Agreed. The best Penguins teams, especially from this era, are teams that could roll four lines. HBK, obviously, you had the Cullen line with Eric Fair, et cetera, et cetera. So they need to get back to that if this team wants to make the playoffs for next season. But that I think will do it for this first segment. Coming up in the second segment, Pat and I are going to dive into more of the questions that you asked us either on YouTube, DMs, or on social media. But before we get to that, we do have to tell you about a couple of our sponsors, namely Indeed. When you're drafting your fantasy team, do you ever wish you could handpick the best stars for your business team? If you're building your talent roster, you need Indeed. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Don't spend hours on multiple job sites looking for candidates with the right skills. Well, you can do it all with Indeed. Find top talent fast with Indeed's suite of powerful hiring tools like matching assessments and virtual interviews. And if you hate waiting, Indeed's US data shows over 80% of Indeed employers find quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches their job description the moment they sponsor the job. Indeed does the hard hiring work for you. Sponsor a job and will match you with quality candidates whose resumes on Indeed fit your job description right when you post. With Indeed, you can start hiring fast. Join over 3 million businesses worldwide using Indeed to hire great talent fast. Indeed knows when you're growing your own business, you have to make every dollar count. That's why with Indeed, you only pay for quality applications that match your must-have job requirements. Visit Indeed.com/lockedon to start hiring right now. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon. Again, Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Cost per application pricing not available for everyone. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Dam. So moving right along with the mailbag for today's episode, this comes from Nielsen Lars on YouTube, who asks, should Malkin move to wing like Mario did late in his career? There's a good amount of second-line centers available in free agency this year if the Penguins want to pursue those types of players. Okay, I do think that is a very valid question, especially since Malkin is going to be 38 at the time of next season. That said, I still do think Malkin is a very good second line center in the NHL, as I said during the Thursday episode. Do I think he's a top line center anymore? No, and that's totally fine. Again, he's not going to age like some of these other centers have in the NHL. He just needs a little bit of help. If you surround him with good quality wingers, he can still cook, and that's exactly what happened, again, when you saw Michael Bunting join his line, and they were unstoppable for the final 20-21 games of the season. And once Rickard Rakell started getting a bit healthy as well, he started to cook with Evgeny Malkin a little bit too. So in terms of wing, no to start next season. I would keep Malkin at center, though if he does struggle, I could see them doing it at some point, though they would have to have someone that can slide up to do that, I think, at that point. So as of right now, Pat, I'm not too interested in moving Malkin to wing just yet.
Neither am I. I think it's also dependent upon who they realistically could get. And you look at a lot of the free agent centers that are coming up, they are going to cost a lot of money. It's going to be a handsome payday. Or at the very least, it's guys who are going to command short deals, 1 to 2 years, and they will also be for big money. I don't think it's the worst idea overall. I think depending upon how this season goes, at maybe once you get late in the year, putting him at wing and seeing what you have with another center. But to start, I'm perfectly fine with keeping Evgeny Malkin as a second line center.
Agreed. Yeah, I don't think you need to move him just yet, just because, again, I really want to see what him and Bunting can do for a full season, just because the numbers with them together were both so damn good. Moving along, this is from RDPQ on YouTube. I have a couple questions. One, there have been rumors about the Penguins and Patrick Laine. What do you think about that? And question two, what type of player would you go for in free agency or trade, in your opinion? Okay, let's start with Patrick Laine. Obviously, I do think he is a good player in the NHL. He's been a 20-goal scorer numerous times. He's also been a 40-goal scorer once in the NHL. But the biggest thing about Laine right now, and Pat, I know you will concur with this, is his health. I just hope that Laine is okay after entering the Players Assistance Program in late January. That is all that matters to me and you right now. If he's able to get right and get out of that, entering the offseason, entering into next season, that is something I would pursue. But then you have to factor in, look at his cap hit. He makes over $8 million for the next couple of years. And Pat, he plays on, I would say, the Columbus Blue Jackets' biggest rival. I don't think they would be too keen on trading him to the Penguins. So for as much as Laine does, I think, make sense for the Penguins, I don't see it happening right now. And again, first and foremost, I really hope he's okay.
Yeah, that's the chief thing, is with him being in the Players Assistance Program. My first and foremost thought is get the help you need, get healthy, whatever it is that is ailing him, because they do not specify why they have entered the Player Assistance Program, and rightfully so. So whatever is going on with him, I hope he gets it fixed. I hope he's healthy. I hope he can return to the National Hockey League and return to a form he had early in his career when he was with the Winnipeg Jets, and he seemed to be able to score at will. But again, I actually disagree a tad about the Blue Jackets dealing him to the Penguins, because remember, this is a team that, while I don't think they're going to strip this thing down to the bone and rebuild again, they have a ton of young players and young talent in their system, and they've got a pretty solid amount of draft picks over the next few years. So whatever management comes in, I think they are going to give this franchise a facelift. I think they're going to move on from a lot of people and give some of these younger guys a shot. And you look at Laine's deal, it's $8.7 million for the next 2 years. I mean, you could see them retaining $1 million or $1.5 million on that deal to get him out there, just to get him into a better situation, because their timeline right now isn't Stanley Cup. Their timeline is be competitive again. And does Laine help with that? Sure. But you look at he's 26, so maybe that still fits in, but just, you probably want to move on into a new era for that team. So moving on from him probably isn't the worst idea, but again, it would cost a good bit, because they're going to retain, and they're going to want something of value in return. I would love to see it happen because I think with the right center and when you have Crosby and Malkin, those are guys who can make a lot of guys do a lot of good things. He can really figure it out, but we'll see. So chief among all of it, I hope he's healthy. I hope he can get back, but I think it would be a tough hurdle to clear. But if whoever the new unnamed general manager of the Columbus Blue Jackets is, once they're hired, Dubas, give him a call and see what it might cost.
Agreed. He does have qualities that the Penguins are definitely lacking, especially finishing, just because this team has been awful at finishing for the last few years now. He knows how to put the puck in the back of the net. He's demonstrated that numerous times throughout his career. So from that avenue, again, assuming everything is okay with him, that will be the main reason why I would be interested. I just don't know if the Penguins would have the assets to maybe pull off that type of deal. And as to the second part of your question, you did ask, what type of player would you go after in free agency or trade? I'm going to throw a name out there. It's not a free agent. It's someone that Pat and I have kind of talked about a little bit, but I'm going to put it out there for everyone that listens to watches this podcast. Trevor Zegras of the Anaheim Ducks. I think he checks a lot of boxes. He's young. He's skilled. He's fast. He can score. Really good passer. He's fine in the defensive zone. Yeah, you are going to have to give up, I think, a decent amount to get him, but he also struggled a little bit this year. Only 6 goals and 15 points in 31 games. If you look at his contract overall, $5.75 million for the next 2 seasons. So the Ducks may retain a little bit on that, but again, 23 years old right now. That's someone who I would be very much a fan of going after via trade this offseason, and I could see him being a piece that could be here for the long haul after the core retires.
I would love Trevor Zegras. I've made my love for that player very well known, but I just don't see it being a possibility because Anaheim is going to want a whole heck of a lot to get rid of him.
Right.
And the Penguins just do not have that. I don't think they have what Anaheim is looking for a player like Trevor Zegras. On the other hand, this is a guy that I have been a shameless fan of, and he'll be 29 going into next season. He is, as far as I can tell, I do believe, if my math is correct, yes, he is a free agent going into this offseason, and that is Anthony Duclair. He is with Tampa. It's not looking good for them in this first round series. He's scored 15 or more goals 4 different times throughout his career. He has been a solid performer. He's a great depth option. He's got some speed. He's got a nose for the net. And that's another type of player that this team has sorely, sorely missed for the last few years.
Yeah, he's been good for Tampa this year. We kind of were looking at him before the trade deadline where the Penguins were kind of still in that buyer's stage before they ended up selling a couple assets. So, yeah, I would be all in favor of Duclair this offseason as well. One more before we do hit our last break. This comes from Eric Scott 8586 on YouTube, who asks, do you guys think there's a small chance that Jake Guentzel will sign back in the offseason? Also, do you think a big portion of the roster will be turned over and moved in the offseason, like Jarry, Achari, Nieto, Riley Smith, Rickard Rakell, Ryan Graves, though he did say, unfortunately, I don't think no one will take his contract unless the Penguins retain some. So starting with your first question with Jake Guentzel, I think there's always a chance. I think it's a small chance, but if you're asking me how likely it is that he comes back, I'm probably going to put it at 5 to 10%. I don't see it happening. He seems fairly happy in Carolina. And even if Carolina doesn't re-sign him and Jake goes to market, he's going to get a contract from a team that will be out of the Penguins' budget, I think, because when you look at the Penguins' salary cap situation compared to other teams who will have more space, those teams will be able to afford Jake just a little bit more than what the Penguins will be able to. Yeah, you can hold on to the hope of maybe Jake taking a hometown discount because I'm sure he would love to come back to maybe play with Sidney Crosby. And I'm sure the Penguins would maybe make an effort to try and bring him back. And it would be awesome if he did come back and prove all this wrong. But right now, I don't fully see that happening. As for the second part of your question, who will be moved? I've said on the show, I think Riley Smith is probably as good as gone. I don't see him back on the team. Tristan Jarry, as I said earlier on, I would look to move him. How Kyle Dubas feels about that, we'll have to see. And then for Achari, Nieto, I'm not too sure if they're going to go down that path. I mean, sure, if they were to trade them, I wouldn't be too upset about it. Ryan Graves, I mean, yeah, that's a dream. If you get out of that contract, I think that's great, but I don't see Kyle Dubas doing that right now. And as he alluded to, Pat, I don't know what team is taking on that contract right now. As for Raquel, that's kind of 50-50 for me. You can make a case for it, as I have. You can make a case against it, as I know other people in the YouTube comments and my DMs have as well. That's going to be a very fascinating situation to watch this offseason.
Yeah, I don't have a ton to add on the second half of the question. You pretty much hit everything I was going to say. As for Gensel, I'm there with you too. I think it's very unlikely. He very much, even though we knew it was unfair, he very much has shed the moniker of he's just a product of Sid. He has lit it up in Carolina and been a massive contributor to their success. And he seems to like it there. There was also reports that he sold his home in Pittsburgh, but he only sold it to Brian Rust. So stays in the hands of the Penguins. But yeah, I don't think there's a world where he comes back just because he's going to cost too much. And even if it's not Carolina, he has only been making more money with his time in Carolina. With every game and every moment, his price is going up and up and up. I'd love to see it, but I'd rate it as highly unlikely.
He's going to be doing this offseason.
He's
Those watching on YouTube, yeah, he's going to be making quite a bit of money once July 1 comes. But that'll do it for the second segment. Coming up to end the show, we're going to dive into more of your questions, including one that asks, what do Pat and I disagree about historically when it comes to the Pittsburgh Penguins? There's not too much that we disagree on, but there is one big thing that I know we disagree on that we'll touch on in the final segment. But before that, we do have to touch on our next sponsor, and that is Monopoly Go. Pat, I've been told I'm a competitive person. Do you think that's true?
Dude, you play Fortnite, and I hear you complaining about it all the time. Yes, you're extremely competitive.
Yes, I play ranked in Fortnite all the time. I play FNCS, which is the big tournament in Fortnite, with my buddy Matt, who he may listen to the show, he may not, who knows. But yes, I am very competitive when it comes to that game in basically everything I do. And my competitive side is also a big fan of Monopoly Go. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's been downloaded over 150 million times. It's a great twist on Monopoly where you can play on not one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities that bring you big money. But the best part, I get to mess with my friends about it. I can charge them rent on my iconic properties, just like classic Monopoly, and I can also heist their vaults of riches for myself. And the leaderboards on there show me who the biggest Monopoly tycoon is. But it's not even just my competitive side that loves it. You can team up with friends and people from all over the world in time tournaments to earn huge rewards. So get in the game and join your friends. Download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or Google Play. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Dam. So a few more questions here to round out the mailbag. This comes from Dylan Crane at Pens Advocator on Twitter. Number one, how would you rank Omar Khan's first two off seasons under GM of the Pittsburgh Steelers? And the second one, okay, obviously the Penguins need youth. Who do you think has the best chance of being on the Penguins next season from the AHL, OHL, etc., and why? Okay, starting with Omar Khan, I think he's done a tremendous job as Steelers general manager. And by the way, shout out to Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers. He is doing a tremendous job with draft content and everything Steelers. If you want to know anything about the Pittsburgh Steelers, please go check out that show. He is an amazing resource, and I'm also pretty fired up about the pick they had on Thursday night. But Omar has just instilled so much confidence within me, and I think a lot of the fan base for the job he's done. He does things very differently compared to Kevin Colbert and GMs even before him. He's a lot more aggressive, which is something that I never thought I would ever see for as long as I've been rooting for the Steelers. And every move I feel like he's made has almost been a home run. Yeah, sure, he's had some misses here and there, but the way that he was able to change out the quarterback room, the way that he was able to draft the tackle on Thursday night, mostly everything he's done, heck, the Patrick Queen signing has been a slam dunk. I do think by the time his tenure is over, he will have brought back at least one Super Bowl to the city.
Yeah, sorry, Chris, to step on your territory here, but I'm a big fan of it. You brought up something that I love about him is I've always been weary of the whole Steeler way thing because you think about it, they won a few Super Bowls in the 70s and then didn't win again until the 2000s. So it wasn't like this was some every decade dynasty. But the thing I like about it is he's taken the things that have worked for the Steelers traditionally and kept them and gotten rid of the things that don't. Like the fact that he makes in-season trades and even really trades at all is awesome, because if you have a problem and you can address it in season, why not go do it? And I love people being petty. I absolutely love it. And I love the fact that he goes out, he gets Russell Wilson after a year and a half of them talking about how much confidence they have in Kenny Pickett and saying they want Kenny Pickett to have some competition. And as soon as that competition comes into the building, Kenny's like, I don't know if I want to compete with that guy. And they're like, okay, we're going to send you to a team that just paid a guy $250 million to be our starter forever. So see ya.
Right. Yeah. I just, again, I love the job he's done. And as for the second part of Dylan's question, who has a chance of coming up from the AHL or OHL or whatever next season, I do think, we discussed this a little bit, Pat. Sam Poulin, he's going to get every shot during training camp. I do think Brayden Yager will get a shot. Obviously, I don't think he's ready yet. Same with Owen Pickering. I think he's going to get a shot. I don't think he's ready yet. I think Ponomarev is definitely going to get a big shot to show what he can do during camp. I would not be surprised if he makes the opening night roster. I think for Ville Koivunen, I know he's been getting a lot of love for the goal that he scored. And by the way, that goal that he scored for Wilkes-Barre was awesome. And he should be back in action this weekend as the Wilkes-Barre Penguins try to avoid elimination against Lehigh Valley. I think he needs a little more seasoning in the AHL for my taste, just because I think he needs to experience more of hockey in North America. I don't think he's going to be on the team to start the year, but maybe a late season call-up season after that, I think you could be looking at him on the team. I just don't think he's ready right now, in my opinion. But those are the players that I think at least will be given opportunities to make the Penguins out of training camp. Is there anyone else that I'm really missing? I mean, Jack St. Ivany will obviously get a chance. He should make the team. So will Ryan Shea. I know he's down there right now. Radim Zahorna, Vinny Hinashos if he's brought back. But am I missing anyone that you can think of?
I got my eye on are Brayden Yager. I don't know if he's going to make the team, but I think he made a lot of noise in camp this past year, and he did very well this year in junior. And at that point, I don't know if he'll make the team. I'm very skeptical. I don't know if he's ready, but I think he's going to force them to take an extended look this year. I don't think he's ready. I don't think he's going to be on the opening night roster, but I get the sense that he has gotten all the counsel he's needed on what it takes to be a pro, and he's going to force them to take a longer look. And then I look at a guy like Owen Pickering. I think he's right there in almost, I don't know if he's ready yet, but he's very close. Those are two guys I'm very interested in watching once we get to training camp and prospect camp and all that stuff. So I'm very excited for those two. And all the names you mentioned at that point, for a lot of them, especially a guy like Poulin, it's time to make your mark. You have to show that you're something, or it's maybe you got to go somewhere else.
Agreed. And as my dogs continue to bark at something downstairs, I agree. I think this is Poulin's last big shot overall in terms of potentially making this NHL roster. If he's not able to do it at camp in the preseason this year, I'm not sure when he's ever going to do it. And I probably forget Tristan Brose. I think he still needs some AHL seasoning as well before he comes up. And of course, Blomqvist will be given every opportunity to make this team out of camp as well. A few more questions, though, before we wrap up for today. This is from Scott the Oreo. With the Pens not making the playoffs, who, if anyone, are you guys rooting for in the playoffs? Well, number one, Carolina for that first-round pick, baby. I want that first in the Jake Gensel trade. I want them to finish off this series against the Islanders. I want them to then hopefully beat the New York Rangers if they do face the Rangers in the second round. And then for as much fun as Florida is to watch, I actually expect the Panthers to come out of the Atlantic side. I would root for Carolina to go to the final, again, just because I want that first round pick. And then for the West, Pat knows this. I'm all in on the Vancouver Canucks. I love their high-end talent. It stinks that Thatcher Demko might not be available for the rest of the series, but I love watching Elias Pettersson. I love watching JT Miller, Brock Besser, Quinn Hughes. The list goes on. Those are the two teams that I'm really hoping do well in the playoffs.
Because I love pain, because I probably hate myself a little bit. Go Leafs, go. Go Leafs, go. I love the way that team's constructed, and that's not just because I like that we have Kyle Dubas now. They are what I think a modern NHL team should be. They finally took the step and got a little bit nastier without sacrificing skill. Their top end talent is so good. And I would love to see them exercise that demon in Boston, because I think if they get out of Boston, the field's wide open. Yes, the Rangers are there. Yes, Florida is there. Yes, Carolina is there, but I'd put them up against those teams as well. And maybe the Rangers are the only one I look at and go, there's no way. But I just think that they're too skilled. They're very good. And I love seeing a tortured fan base finally get their moment if they're not a rival. And there's no world where I consider the Toronto Maple Leafs a rival.
See, I hear you on that, but I find it fun that they keep getting tortured. And I hope that continues for a while. I'm a dedicated hater for that. It goes with my cruel heart, I think, is, if you want to call it that. But I think if the Leafs were to play the Panthers in the second round, I just don't like that matchup for them. The Panthers, when they're humming like this, I don't know if there's a team in the East that can beat them in a 7-game series. I do think Carolina would have the potential to do it, but the Panthers are just firing on all cylinders right now. I expected Florida to beat the Lightning in this series, and I expect them to win these first 3 games the way they have, because
realistically, if I'm not talking rooting interest, I get a very real sense we're going to have a Stanley Cup rematch this year.
We could. Vegas is, again, a great villain, and I would kind of be surprised if they lost the series to the Stars after going up 2-0. But that will do it for that question. Just 2 more to end the show here. This comes from Alan T. Yoder. First off, what job would you want to have with the team, and how excited would you be for a Bunting, Malkin, Raquel line? I mean, Bunting, Malkin, Zucker line, excuse me, is what he did ask, not Raquel. That would be fun. You would have 2 pretty good finishers. In Bunting's case, someone that can really go to the net. Zucker, I think, is a bit better of a sniper compared to Bunting, and then Malkin, really good playmaker, and also has a great shot still as well. I would love that line, but I don't think it's going to happen, obviously, this offseason. And what job I would want to have with the Penguins organization? See, I might throw that to you to start, because I've been thinking about it, and I'm not sure what I would choose.
See, I've had a couple pro hockey jobs. I was a digital media director for an AHL team in the Utica Comets. That was a lot of fun, because it was a very fun, creative job. You know, it wasn't just showing up on game days and live tweeting and tweeting out Photoshop graphics. It was writing articles for the website. It was creating video content for the team's website and YouTube channels. And it's an all around really fun job if you have the opportunity to get it and you have the means to do it and the skills to do it, because the sky is the limit. It's not like there's some rigid line that you got to toe. There's obviously professionalism and other things you got to keep an eye on, but I had a ton of fun doing that. Honestly, my dream job right now, if I could get a job with the Penguins, is never going to be open, because he's never going anywhere. And that's basically the job that Paul Steigerwald has, where he essentially just does pre and post game shows, does a lot of feature work for the Penguins. It's a lot of really fun long form interviews with people with the team. And I love doing stuff like that. I love the feature writing. I love the long form interviews with players and talking to them about things other than the sport. So if that was ever an opportunity for me, I would not think twice and jump.
That's a good one. Now that I had a little bit more time to think about, just because I was going back and forth between so many, my dream job would be Michelle Cracchiolo's job. I think she does a tremendous job as the team reporter. Her feature stories are awesome, and she's been filling in on the radio at times and been doing a great job next to Steve Mears. She gets to travel with the team. Doing something like that would be very much up my alley. So I think that would probably be a dream job if I had the chance to work for the organization at some point. And finally, one more question. We'll get you all out of here. Pat, this came into your Instagram DM, so I'm going to let you take this one.
I did. I got a message from, I hope I'm saying this correctly. If I'm not, my apologies, from Kiera on Instagram. She sent me this, and she actually tried to send this one to us last time we did a mailbag, but I just had missed it. I got it this time, though. She asks, other than the blue jerseys, what historically do you and Hunter disagree on when it comes to the history of the Penguins? And ironically, it's right behind me. It's the Robo Penguin logo. Now, I have that one up because that's the only Robo Penguin jersey I have ever liked. That's the only time I've enjoyed the Robo Penguin. I think it's a very dumb logo. I understand why people like it. I get it. You are more than happy and more than welcome to like it. I do not. They won 2 Stanley Cups in a row and immediately rebranded and had probably the biggest heartbreak loss in the history of their franchise. And then they bring it back last year and their franchise-setting playoff streak dies. Is it coincidence? Of course it is. Am I going to say it's not coincidence? It's because of the Robo Penguin? Of course I am. So yeah, that's one thing we historically disagree on is the Robo Penguin.
That sound that you hear, everyone, is Patrick Damp being fired as one of the co-hosts of the Locked On Penguins podcast. That is, he's not allowed to do a show ever again. No, I'm just messing around, of course, but I cannot disagree with you more. I love the logo. I love every jersey of it. I know it definitely stunk that they brought it back and then they missed the playoffs that year. But hey, I have one of those jerseys in my closet, just over here. And
I will say that reverse retro in black with that did work pretty well. I just have the scars from the logo in the bad years, but them finally doing an actual proper black Robo Penguin jersey was pretty solid.
It's gorgeous. At the end of the day, it is. I know some people will disagree with me and support Pat. I know people will disagree with Pat and support me, but I can't get enough of the Robo Penguin, and I will cherish it forever. I hope they keep bringing out more and more different versions of that jersey at some point in the future. But I think that would do it for this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. Thank you all so much for taking the time to listen to / watch this episode. And thank you all so much for the mailbag questions. Pat and I will be back with another episode for you all on Monday to recap how Wilkes-Barre did this weekend. Will they be alive? Will they be eliminated? Discuss the playoffs and everything else relating to the Pittsburgh Penguins. So for Patrick Damp, I am Hunter Hodes. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We'll talk with you all on Monday.